bit different this week. I prefer the open table over the podium. I like to have the sense that I'm a little bit closer, that something's not in my way. So, as I'm getting ready here, so it's been interesting to see everything that's been going on, and as I'm going to be talking about something called inerrancy, and you see it up there. But it's just interesting that, unfortunately, if you look at the mainstream media, they love to show errors of Israel, what they're doing, especially in Gaza. And but when they do something good, the world doesn't talk about it. So you can see that as a bit of an error. Why is the world so concerned when Israel is involved in a way that they can try and make Israel look bad because there are these people that are sending errors, and our general media likes to portray the errors, not portray the truth. But at the same time, when they're doing something good, the general media says nothing about it. So with that, we will get into inerrancy, but in this one, we'll be spending time on inerrancy regarding how it comes to understanding the scriptures. So the first question will hopefully help answer today. And if those of you who have gone through this before, you'll notice that in your manuals, it's quite short. I'm going to make it it'll be a little bit longer today, just to help us hopefully get a little more of an understanding on how we should look at it. So the next one I'll be hopefully trying to answer today as well is why is it important to our understanding of the scriptures? So why do we need to believe and understand that the scriptures are without error? The other one is, because we find seeming errors in scripture, does that mean we cannot trust our scriptures? And then the final one I'll hope to help us answer as well is, what do we mean by inerrancy when it comes to the scriptures? So those of you who have your Bibles with you or on your phones, whatever, if we go to Hebrews 6 verse 18, it says that and there's two verses that, so there are the questions up, thank you, Lois, that I was just talking about, and we'll talk a little more on. In Hebrews 6 verse 18, that by two immutable things in which it was impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us. So if you guys want to look it up, you can. Now, what then are those two things referring to that Elohim says, whereby he cannot lie? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And the other verse that would generally come up would be, in this context, would be 2 Timothy 3 verses 16 and 17, which says that for the scriptures are useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, that every man of God might be fully equipped for every good work. And so this is why it's important that we spend a little time talking about what is inerrancy. And clearly, I actually tried to look up this word in a dictionary, and I have an older dictionary, and I was surprised to see that the word's not in there. Maybe some of you have dictionaries that have this word. So it seems to me like it's something that's it's a little more maybe towards when we're referring to scriptures. So anyway, just to let you know that, because most of the time I would actually find the word in this dictionary and it would be there. So first, we need to look past, I'll say this, if those of you who kind of have done a little bit of study on Western thinking, generally speaking, versus Hebrew thinking, generally speaking, is that in Western thinking, we tend to focus more on your words carry more value than your actions. But in a Hebrew or a Semitic way of thinking, your words need to also line up with your actions. Now, I know that in our West, our actions are very important. For example, when you go to work, or if you're running your own business, if you say you're going to do something, or if your boss asks you to do something, you're going to go out and do it. So we see there that part of not what without being error means is that what you say you do. Otherwise, your words are generally meaningless. So, and in the scriptures we see here first, so that if we look at, for example, the first one again, you've probably noticed I like to spend a lot of time on creation, those of you who have heard me. But because I believe that that's really important to whenever we study things when it comes to our scriptures. Because in the beginning we know that on day one, God said, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Now, there's, generally speaking, those of you who have studied a little more of the grammar and the context, there is a little bit of disagreement on what God was saying, if it was in the context, if it's a subordinate clause or an independent clause. Essentially, I take the view that it is an independent clause because it's speaking on its own, but it's also subordinate. So, because it is also referring to what God is going to do over the next 6 days, the 6 days of creation, because the first day he creates the heavens and the earth. Now, why is that important to our understanding of inerrancy? Because how we view that first clause will also affect how you understand the scriptures when you're reading them. So, as much as it's important that we just read them for what they say, we also need to get a little more background on what the phrase means and how it's being used. Now, the other reason that I believe that it's both is because often in Scripture, we see that when God says something, there's a part of it that you cannot see, but there's also part of it that you can see. So the unseen is just as important as the seen. And so when you say, again, like I was talking about earlier, and so when Elohim spoke, we saw that it came into being. Now, if we agreed that and this is the first day of creation was a literal 24 hours, then that means that logically, if you think that way, the rest of the week of creation, including the seventh day where he rested, would also be 24 hours. Now, I was talking with somebody not too long ago, and they kind of see it a little bit differently. And they would see it as God was writing this so that we would understand it, and that's true. But they would also then make it say that because we can't really know for sure what God was saying and how long it took to create, because there is if you look at one of the verses, it makes it almost seem as though, at least in verse 1, depending on how you look at it, and others as well, that there might have been something that was already created. So if you believe that the earth was already created, then why then would you believe that it's a literal 24 hours? It could have been, maybe it was created, then it's like maybe he recreated it. But I'm of the view that when he spoke it on the first day, that's how he created it on that day. But he's going to give more details as he continues to create what we have the rest of the week. So, I hope you can see through that how it will change if you're discussing something with somebody, how you tend to view it, and how you'll be able to stand up for what you believe. So and I'm not the only one who's saying this. There's others who also believe that God literally created it in 24 hours. And I hope to show a little bit more of that even as we go along and talk a little more about what God has done, and that he always does things on a certain time, that he doesn't just kind of leave it out there, kind of like, oh, I'll do this whenever. We might not always understand his timing. We might wait a long time before we get the answer. But it's not him just kind of throwing it out there on a whim, deciding that, okay, today I'm going to give you the answer. Or today I'm going to say, wait, tomorrow, and then I'll give the answer later. He's not like that. He knows what he's doing, even if we don't always understand. So, and I'll read what I wrote here. Note some may, but we cannot ascertain because we do not know how long a day is or how long the earth existed before Elohim recreated it. That's what I was just talking about. But we do know that the way we see it, even in a Western way, there's 24 hours. There's 24 hours in a Western way of thinking. There's 24 hours, doesn't matter where you're coming from. That's why you can have your watch on a 12-hour, or you can go by what they call military time, which is 24 hours. But every culture believes that we have a 24-hour clock. So that would then mean that it seems as though the idea of a day was fairly consistent. Nobody was saying, well, maybe it's actually 1,000 hours, or maybe it's this, something else. That is just how creation works throughout the whole world. So if you look at it that way, it can help hopefully answer some questions for maybe you have yourself or maybe for others. And another example I want to point out is when Adam and Hava sinned, death happened immediately. Now, what do I mean by that? Did they physically hit the ground when they ate the fruit? No, they didn't. But the death that did happen immediately was the relationship was lost. Before, when Elohim would show up, or I believe it was Yeshua who was actually showing up, they didn't go and hide. But when they're deceived into sinning, then they went and hid themselves. So there we have that one example of what God said he did it. And now we know eventually Adam lived for 900 and some years. Methuselah lived 960 some years. Eventually physical death did happen. And the other example is Noah. So Noah, we know, was told by God that he was going to send a flood. So then, because Noah believed God, God told Noah what he was supposed to do. So Noah didn't wait, because Noah didn't know exactly when the flood was going to come. So though he couldn't have immediately, depending on when he was told when God would, about the flood coming and what he was supposed to do and how he was supposed to prepare the ark, he would have already been in his, let's say, it was nighttime, it was dark, he couldn't go outside yet and start putting things together and cutting trees down, that sort of thing. He would have already had an idea, okay, this is what we need to do. So he started immediately. He didn't wait a couple days. He started as soon as he was able. He got his sons together. They figured out, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what we need. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to start to build it. So we see here that he acted right away based on what God said. And yet, all he knew is that God was going to send a flood. He didn't know when the flood was coming. God knew when the flood was coming. And the other one is the story of Pesach. Now, we have a hard time, I know some of us, with this story, because it seems as though Elohim is dirtying his hands. Why do I say that? Because during the story, you'll see if you're reading it, and I'm going through it again right now, is that he hardens Pharaoh's heart. Now, I know there's different ways that we can try to explain it to make it seem as though God didn't dirty his hands. Now, of course, the question then is, what do you mean he didn't dirty his hands? And we know that it does say in Romans chapter 9, it talks about, who are you, O man, to question God? What he's doing, why he's doing it. You have no right. He's, if you create something, if you make a piece of pottery, okay, and you want to make it into a glass or a bowl, the pottery isn't going to open, the glass can't talk. So it can't say to you, what are you doing? Why are you making me this way? Who are you? Right? So who are we? That's what Paul's trying to say. We're the potter. He's the one who makes us. He's the potter, we're the clay. So who are you to question him and what he's doing? So we see here that Elohim had to destroy every single god. And we also see here that Pharaoh would not allow his heart to be softened until God at the end decided that it's time for you to let them go. And we also see here the other part of this when it comes to our understanding of in inerrancy is that we see God doing what he said. So every single miracle that happened was that God told Moses, I'm going to do this. And he did every one. He didn't do more. He didn't do less. He only did what he said he was going to do. So through that, we can see how the scriptures that we have, again, are without error. And that idea of why God cannot lie. So in this story alone, we see then an example of God's character. Though we may not like how it happened, this would be a discussion for another time. And now let's also look at the apostolic scriptures, which show a bit of a different, what it means for our understanding of the scriptures towards inerrancy, is that when Yeshua came, he came to set us free from our sin. And it's interesting if you notice that whenever he would cast out an evil spirit from somebody, he would always tell them, or in the other miracles, he would always say, don't tell anybody. Okay, why would he say that? Because he wasn't coming the way that Israel back then wanted him. Even today, they're still waiting for this leader to come to defeat all their physical enemies. Now we know that Netanyahu is doing a pretty good job, but in the case with Yeshua, and at this time, he was coming because he knew first that relationship needed to be restored. And also, it's interesting that he tells when the demons because the demons knew who he was, he would tell them to be quiet, and they had to listen. It's only the people that he allowed to not listen. Notice that the demons, when he says, don't say who I am, they don't say who he is. But the people, when he says that, don't say who I am, they go around shouting who he is, shouting, this is who he is. So he did that because he knew that they would try and force him to go to take up a sword and go defeat Rome, because Rome had the power over them at that time. And so again, we see this idea of the character showing that when God sends his son, that he sends without error. Yeshua was coming the first time to die for us. And so I'll just read something here that I wrote. He came the first time as the suffering Joseph, and tells those he casts out not to speak who he was, for they already knew. This way the masses would not be so quick to try and force him to become the conqueror of Rome, who was in power at that time. He again shows his character by staying true to why he came, to be born, live, die, ascend to heaven, and intercede for us as our perfect high priest. And if those of you who know this verse, again in Genesis 3:15, it talks specifically of this one who had to come to redeem fallen mankind. And so again, we see that God is true to what he says, because we know, and we know, and I know many of you know some examples, and I'm going to talk about at least one of them now. One example is in Bereshit, or Genesis chapter, let me find it here. Okay, 46 verse 27. I'm only going to read the last part of it. All the souls of the house of Jacob which came into Egypt were 70. Now, the other one that's more popular when it comes to this is in Acts 7, verse 14, where Stephen's speaking to those who were bringing lies, who wanted to stone him. And I'll read the whole verse here. And Joseph called the father of him Jacob, and all the kindred of him in souls 75. So why would Moses, who wrote Bereshit, Genesis, say 70, and Stephen says 75? So then that means, okay, does that mean that the scriptures have error? Or does it mean that we just need to do a little more research to find out why? Because if you look at the rest of the Tanakh, and I went through a little bit, most of the time when it's talking about those who came in, it says 70. It doesn't say 75. It's only Stephen here in Acts that says 75. So he obviously would have known enough of the Tanakh, because that's what it was still called back then. Some of us today still call it Tanakh. He would have known enough to know that there was 70. So there must be another reason why he decided to use the word 75. And I'm not really going to go into that, but I just wanted to show you that sometimes it's not the scriptures that are in error. It's easier to understand if you just have the same number all the time, and if the other person has the same number. But if we do our own research, we can figure out, okay, this is why Stephen said it the way he did. So, and also because Moses and Stephen, God didn't override their writing. He didn't force them to write things in a certain way. He allowed them to have that, so so that way it was from them. It's not just like take a memo. So again, we see that idea of the power of God, even in something like that, showing how our scriptures do not have error. So, because another example of this would be, I hope to help you, some of you understand this a little more, is many of you who come here spend time with people from the Philippines, and my wife's from the Philippines, as many of you know, and sometimes you guys will talk about things, and it's an idiom or it's a joke you might have between each other. But I don't understand it. Now, if you try and translate it into English, it's going to lose a lot of its meaning. So I might get some of the joke, but it won't mean the same to me, because I don't understand your language. So same here in the scriptures. That's what I'm trying to say. When it comes to these little things, like I just mentioned, we need to try and, that's not my common language and culture and history, I need to try and do a little more study, a little more looking into what you're saying and learn it, so that way I can get the complete understanding. I can't assume that just because, I can't assume that, and I'll talk about this a little bit, just because in my language it seems different, then something must be wrong with what it means in your language. I can't do that. And so it would be, for example, one of you writes a book, and it's talking about what's going on in the history and the culture today, and you decide you want to have it in a safe. And time goes by, eventually you pass on, your family eventually moves. Let's say there's a war coming, wars happen, so you had to move to another country. And this country where you wrote your book completely changed its culture and its history. But unfortunately, when you moved, you accidentally left the safe with that book here. So time goes by, the culture and history is changing more. All of a sudden, somebody finds this book. They find the safe, they open the safe, and because it's not the one that necessarily needs a key. We have, I forget what those are called, but anyhow. So they open it, they take your book out, and they start reading it. Now, let's say they have some technology or even some books on how the culture used to be. But they decide that, it must be wrong because, it's not written in the culture of ours today, and we're trying to put it into our culture, so we can't trust what it's saying. So then the question is that fair? And also, for example, when we read different pieces of like poems or history or something on science or something legalese, you generally switch into a different understanding when you're reading that. You don't have the same way of understanding a child's book as you would if you were to read a legalese. You're talking about a child here. Child thinks differently about things. So here, rather than, so now people are saying, it's wrong and you can't trust it. But other people are like, I don't know. What if we were to try and do a little more research? So what the natural thing would, hopefully an honest person would actually try and do more research to find out what that was saying at that time in that culture. So we too, even when we're understanding our scriptures, it's very helpful if we try and take what was happening in their culture at the time. What's their history? Why were they writing it? Where is it coming from? So we can hopefully better understand it for ourselves and hopefully help others around us better understand what it's saying too. Not just assume that because it was went away back then and they're not here anymore, that culture doesn't seem to be as important, then just saying it's wrong or just throwing it out. And unfortunately, that is one of the things that happens when you come up with the word Old Testament versus New Testament. Your mind tends to go, that old camera, that's a nice thing I keep on my shelf, but I'm not going to use it. It might remind me of something, maybe that's why I bought it. But, I'm going to use something new, which, most of the time makes more sense. But in the scriptures, we need to understand that it is for today as much as it was back then. It's not for them, and it's not for me. And unfortunately, in Christianity, we've seen that separation started happening many, many years ago, and they were able to now do away with using a lot of the scriptures and trying to understand what the Tanakh was saying, the Old Testament was saying, to going, I only need the New Testament. The Old Testament, I don't need that anymore. Or the opposite happens. Some people go the other way. I only need the Old Testament. The New Testament, no, I'll throw you out. And we even know that within the rabbis themselves and those who teach, they have certain portions of the Tanakh that in Judaism that they don't read. because unless they can interpret it to say something else, if it's talking about Yeshua, they don't want to have anything to do with that. So, we need to be willing to look past it. And they need to go the other way, because they do generally, throughout the New Testament, the apostolic scriptures or writings, and just stick to the Old, or the Tanakh. But in our case, we need to spend a little more time. Usually it's going the other way, because we usually spend a lot of time in the New Testament. That's not where we go wrong. So we see that they work together, that you need one. And even the disciples and the apostles themselves, for their way of life, they used the Tanakh to help them understand how to live. They didn't have the apostolic scriptures like we have them today. Paul hadn't written his epistles yet. James and John and them, they hadn't written yet. So how could they have known? Well, they could have only known how to live, how to treat each other from what the Tanakh says. So we see here then how Elohim supersedes the scriptures that we have. What I mean by that, I know I talked a little bit about last week about inspiration. And so all I'll say about that is that he is over everything. And he made sure that it was done correctly. Now, of course, because we do have these errors, it then means that we come up with many different ways of understanding. Therefore, we have this different Judaism, or this different Christianity, or this different Messianic. Okay? And so some of that, you go, okay, well, that seems like it's a really big problem. How are we going to get over this? But it's interesting. Those of you who've studied under Tim Hague, I know Brother Luel has a little bit, I believe, did at least to a resource. I don't know if he did this, but I haven't studied under Tim Hague, so I'm not saying I have. I have his books, and I'm reading some of them right now. Anyway, he talks about this class where what he does is he takes students who are first years, and he gives them a poem. No, he doesn't give them a poem. He says, I'm going to read this poem to you. So he tells them, I'm going to read it once. You have to listen to what I say. Then this poem, and it's not a difficult poem. It's a simple poem. So he reads this poem to them. And when he gets back what they wrote, and they might have punctuational errors, grammatical errors, missing words, or maybe would became could or should or something like that. So generally, the writing that they gave him of what they heard about the poem was most of it was wrong. There was only maybe a very small percentage that could remember it exactly word for word. So then what he does with the fourth year students, so those who are graduating, he takes what they wrote, this poem, and he gives it to his fourth year students. And he has lots of copies, so he gives that to them, and he says, okay, you guys get together. Now, you need to figure out what the original said. Now, the reason he does this is because it's helping people to understand how we get errors of grammar and errors when if you guys have played the game where you tell a story, eventually the story is most of the time is so off from what it was originally. When the original person heard it, they're like, how did you get it? How did you change it that much? So in this case, because we know how people make errors, God has given us that ability. He has given us rules to be able to figure this out. We can, if we have enough compilations, we can figure out what the original actually would have said. So, and most of the time, the originals tend to be a little bit more difficult in our reading. Our mind wants to generally make things easier, so that's one way. So they were amazed that by the end of the class, they were back to all of there's only a few who still weren't quite right, but most of them, it was 97% of it was correct. And it kind of amazed the students because they were like, wow, I knew this one had this, and this student next to me, they were together, theirs had this and this copy, so I knew mine had to have that. They were eventually able to work their way back to 97% correct. And so it is with our manuscripts. We have so many that when they were saying things such as a few years ago, people were talking about, oh, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't exist. There's no proof that he exists. That's the craziest thing. The Bible just made it up, doesn't know what it's talking about. As they started doing digging in Israel and other places in Babylon and around that, they found lots and lots in archaeology proving that yes, Nebuchadnezzar did exist. The Bible wasn't lying about that either. So now with all of our manuscripts that we have, it shows that our scriptures are without error, and the science and the history. So again, going back to how we can trust, like God says, about two immutable things, that he cannot lie. And so the other thing is, too, why we can trust our scriptures to be error, even though we know that there are, again, some errors, and it's more so in I would say in the New Testament, the apostolic writings or scriptures, because they, based on their theology, sometimes will change things so they can put their theology in. I'm not denying that. But anyhow, I'm still saying we can still trust them. And so, because at the time when they were canonizing, so the word canon just means rule, for those of you who don't know. So when they were canonizing the scriptures, there were still a lot of people alive who would have remembered what Yeshua said, what he did, what Matthew wrote, all of these things. Even unbelievers, if somebody were to put something in there or to say like, oh, well, that's not how we remember it, they wouldn't have been able to get away with just translating it how they felt, because people would have still remembered, and so they would have had a lot more push from the general population to make sure that they had it correct. And regardless whether they believed in Yeshua or not. Because even today we see that if somebody knows something to be true, they're generally going to say, no, that's not how it is, it was like this. Now, so the final example then has to do with oaths. And it's interesting that the first one I'll talk about here is, if we look at Abraham. So Abraham was told to leave his land, go to another land, and God would make of him a great nation. Did Abraham see that happen in his lifetime? No, he didn't. In fact, him and his wife get together, decide, oh, you know what? We know better than Hashem does. We know better than Elohim. Abraham, I'm going to go sleep with your handmaid. They do it in the flesh. So of course, as we know, the handmaid gets pregnant. Isaac is born, so eventually, of course, Ishmael is born. Eventually, Isaac comes along, but before that, of course, we know that Abraham's still a little bit worried, but yet he still shows his faith. And eventually, it would go to Isaac through Sarah, that she would have a child. But my point is here, God spoke something, and it didn't happen right away. It didn't happen for many years. So, yet he still carried out what he said that he would do for them. He didn't go back on it. He didn't go, okay, good job, Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. Yeah, I'm going to go with what you decided to do. No, that's not what he said. He didn't also say to them, oh, well, you did it wrong, so I'm going to throw you out and start over. We do know one area of Scripture where he did say that. It was to Moses about the people that he just brought out of Egypt. But anyhow, he didn't do that for Abraham. He still blessed Ishmael because Ishmael is the son of Abraham. And so Isaac comes, and according to the oath that God had made. And eventually, we saw that Isaac, then we would have Jacob, and so on. So eventually, this great nation did come. But that was we saw that, and Abraham wouldn't have seen it till he's probably up there today, I would suspect. But anyway, he didn't know about it at the time that he was here, how it would all work out. So the next one here is based on, let's go the other way. So this is a good way. Let's go the opposite way. The sense of a negative. So we know that Elohim tells Israel, if you will be obedient to me and listen to my words and do what I say, I will bless you, I will keep you in the land. Now, Moses had already given them, before they even go into the land, you got to ask yourself this question, then why would he do this? And this, Moses knew, because he lived with them for how many years? And they were so rebellious, even though God was keeping them. Anyway, they have the blessings and the curses. Eventually, we get into the land. Joshua goes in. Some of the people go onto Mount Gerizim. They read the blessings. Ebal, those people read the curses. Unfortunately, the reality is, like even ourselves, we generally are disobedient. Israel walked away from God. Now, how did they walk away? They were still keeping Shabbat, they were still keeping the feasts. The problem was, when they got into the land, they didn't conquer and get rid of all of their enemies. And Elohim told them, if you don't, Elohim said through Moses, if you don't get rid of them, they're going to be a thorn in your side. Just like they were with the whole Baal and Balak, and the Midianites there, how though they won Baal, he was able through the women to get them to commit idolatry. Because and we know what happened there with the story of Phinehas, how he's the only one that gets the spear and goes and kills a leader of the tribe of Simeon and the woman he was with, who was also very high in her culture. She wasn't some low woman that just looked pretty. No, she had a lot of stature in her culture. So because of that, and then eventually they started to commit syncretism. That's what they did in the land. They would worship their God and at the same time try and believe they could worship another God. So God, of course, at first he starts out gentle, not too harsh on the punishment, hoping they will do what he said. Get rid of them. Get rid of their gods. I'll keep you there. But no, they don't. They get worse. For a little bit, they get better. They get worse and worse. Eventually, he has to do everything that he said he would do to them if they didn't listen. And he did those things to the people that he got rid of out of the land because they were committing similar sins. So Israel was supposed to be different. So he kicks Israel out. And we know that because they've been scattered through all the nations. That's why Europe and the Holocaust happened. Because Hitler was started in Germany, went to all these nations to try and exterminate all the Jews. And so like he said, if you don't listen, this is going to happen. And it happened. Many years later, it happened. Now, let's go back the other way. So because of that, but he did also tell them, and we can see this, and Moses talks about it. Also, I should mention, Joshua also talks about them disobeying God to the point of getting kicked out. So Moses and Joshua both mention it. So Moses mentions that God's going to bring them back. And so do a lot of the other prophets. Most of the prophets talk about, in some way, this idea of Israel coming back. I can't remember the exact numbers. So, and we see that happening now, right? First we saw it after the war, World War II ended. They got their land back. There was already probably a few Jews kind of just living there, but not the way it was after World War II, where they got this land, the UN voted, and they voted to say, okay, this land belongs to Israel. A lot smaller than what they had before. So here we are again, not right away, but many years later, God says, and we see what he said would happen, and he's doing it now. He did it back then in 48, and he's doing it now. We can see it happening. And it's interesting because of all of the unfortunate anti-Semitism that's happening. Jews around the world, more of them are starting to go back because they're not safe in the West, in Europe, in these other countries where they used to be safe because they knew that those people would protect them. I was saying to somebody the other day, thankfully, Israel has their land because they need to go back so that their military will protect them. So here we see God's scriptures are not, they do not have error. They're without error. They're inerrant. And he's bringing them back to his land. And this also then means that when it go to Abraham, we see that now he is being blessed in a way where we, as those who aren't Jewish, as far as we know, maybe some of you here are, I don't know, but as far as I know, I'm not. So we're coming back and we're enlarging what God had promised to Abraham. We're enlarging Israel. We're not becoming something different. We're being grafted in to Israel. We are now have the privilege of being able to keep Shabbat and the other feasts. Sure, not exactly like they do, because yes, we didn't grow up in it. So, but we are learning together how to do that. And so we see here again that God is keeping his word to Abraham. And just like Caleb, because Caleb was fully accepted, where he was even given land. So we get to look forward to that one day. We get to have land in Israel. Even if you're not a Jew, even if you're not married to one. You get to go there one day because you believe in him, when you believe in Yeshua, when he comes back, that's where you get to live and you get to enjoy the wonderful food there one day. And I can't wait for that. So let's keep going here. And so we see here, and I'll just read this, and end with kind of talking a little bit about what, if it was a regular Shabbat, we would have been talking about the parasha for today, on with that a little bit, but I'll just read this first. So, and just like Joseph was given a vision by Elohim many years earlier, Joseph saw part of his vision now become a reality. So our scriptures are without error, as Elohim said in Hebrews 6, verses 17 to 18. So those of you who have read it, today's portion talks about Joseph now being put second in command to Pharaoh, given a wife, they have 2 kids, and the rest of it talks about how we see his brothers, because the famine is so great in the entire world, they have to go and they bow down to him. So again, we see that even though Joseph probably had ideas of what this might look like at this point, he still trusted God way back when Elohim first showed him that his family would one day bow to him. And so here they are. They don't recognize him. Just like Israel today, for the most part, they don't recognize him yet. They're slowly recognizing him, but they're gonna, one day many more of them will recognize him before he shows up. So we see here, even in the story of Joseph, that the scriptures are without error, because God is now going to finish fulfilling for Joseph what he showed to Joseph many years earlier. So that's what I have for today on inerrancy.
Mic for a little while. Okay, so to put in context, we are in a